When we talk about the richest person of all time, we usually think of very familiar names: Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, billionaires from the tech world with tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars. But interestingly, if you sat historians and economists down together, many of them would tell you that the richest person in human history probably isn't any of the billionaires you just thought of. This man lived more than 700 years ago. He had no stocks, no tech corporations, and no investment banks. What he owned was gold, salt, and the trade routes that stretched across the Sahara Desert. He wasn't European, nor was he an Arab merchant from the Middle East. He was a black king from West Africa, from an empire that most school history books barely even mention, the Mali Empire. There are records that say that on a journey of thousands of kilometers, this king handed out gold so generously that the cities he passed through were thrown into economic turmoil for years. The price of gold crashed. Merchants were overjoyed to receive free gold, yet at the same time horrified as their own wealth suddenly lost value. A man so rich that just going on a trip was enough to shake an entire region. In this video, we're going to dive into the story of what the Mali Empire actually was and how a West African empire could become so incredibly wealthy. We'll explore what the king often regarded as the richest person in all of human history, Mansa Musa, actually did to amass such an enormous fortune. And more importantly, why an empire as splendid as Mali, with its gold, its trade, and its learning, eventually collapsed and slowly disappeared from the memory of most of the world. If up to now you've always thought that world history mainly revolves around Rome, Europe, or China, then the story of the Mali Empire might just help you see the world in a much wider way.
Background: where is Mali on the world map? Before we talk about gold and fabulously rich kings, we need to answer a very simple question. Where is Mali on the world map? If you open a map of Africa today, you'll see Mali is a landlocked country in West Africa, with most of it sterically made up of desert or semi-desert. Northern Mali stretches up into the Sahara Desert, one of the driest and harshest regions on earth. To the south, the land gradually turns into grasslands, savanna, and forest, where the Niger River flows, one of the most important rivers in the region. Modern Mali borders Mauritania and Algeria to the north, Niger to the east, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, and Guinea to the south and southwest, and Senegal to the west. But if we turn the clock back to roughly the 13th to 16th centuries, the political map here looked very different. Back then, it wasn't just a small modern state of Mali, but a vast Mali empire that controlled large areas of what is now Mali, Mauritania, Senegal, Guinea, Niger, and parts of neighboring countries. In other words, if we redraw the map in medieval terms, the Mali Empire is like a great cloak draped over a huge stretch of West Africa. That leads us to the next question. How does an empire sitting on the edge of the desert with no coastline become rich? The answer lies in its position as a gateway between two worlds. To the north were the Sahara Desert and the cities along the Mediterranean. To the south were forests and the gold fields of sub-Saharan Africa. In an age without aeroplanes and without modern ships, people relied mainly on roads, rivers, and especially long-distance caravans crossing the desert. The Sahara, though harsh, was not an impenetrable wall. The Berber peoples and others learned how to organize caravans, long trains of camels carrying goods that crossed the desert on journeys lasting weeks or even months. These caravans were like the main arteries connecting the cities on the Mediterranean and in North Africa with the deep interior of the African continent, where there was gold, salt, slaves, ivory, spices, and countless other goods. The Mali Empire sat right on top of this giant hub, where goods from the south, gold, slaves, ivory, and more, were brought north, and goods from the north, Salt, cloth, luxury items, knowledge, and religion were carried south. In an age when gold was the ultimate measure of wealth and salt was almost a strategic asset used to preserve food and maintain health, controlling the trans Saharan trade routes was almost the same as holding the economic lifeline of the entire region. So, even without access to the sea, the Mali Empire still controlled important trading cities along the Niger River and near the desert's edge, the major stopping points for caravans, and crucially, the gold producing regions deep inside West Africa. From a medieval economic perspective, Mali was like a giant intersection between North Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East on one side, and sub Saharan Africa on the other. That geographic and commercial foundation explains how an empire on the edge of the desert could rise to become one of the most important centers of gold and trade in the world at that time. And to understand who it was that turned this geographic advantage into the real power of an empire, we need to go back a little further to the time when Mali still stood in the shadow of another empire, the Ghana Empire.
The rise of an empire, from Ghana to Mali, and Sundiata Keita. The Mali Empire did not appear out of nowhere. Before Mali became a famous name in West Africa, this region had already been the heart of another empire, the Ghana Empire. The Ghana Empire, not to be confused with the modern nation of Ghana, once controlled large areas of West Africa and grew rich thanks to one thing: gold. For many centuries, Ghana acted as a kind of gatekeeper. Gold from deep inside the continent flowed northward, while salt, cloth, and luxury goods from North Africa moved southward. Caravans crossing the Sahara had to pass through its territory, and every caravan that did so had to pay taxes, or at least some price in exchange for the safety to trade. But like many other empires in history, Ghana gradually weakened for several reasons: wars with neighboring powers, internal conflicts, and shifts in the trade routes. As Ghana entered a period of crisis, a new force began to rise in the southeast, the Kingdom of the Mali people. It was in this context that an important figure appeared: Sundiata Keita. According to legends and oral tradition in the region, Sundiata Keita was not born a mighty hero. As a child, he is said to have been weak, struggled to walk, and even mocked for being unable to stand firm like other children. Yet, from that seemingly disadvantageous starting point, Sundiata became a symbol of willpower and resilience. As he grew up, he gradually proved his leadership, won over various tribes, and step by step built a following around himself. Sundiata's major rival at the time was the king of Soso, who controlled parts of the former Ghana territories and posed a threat to the Mande people of the region. According to tradition, the decisive battle between Sundiata and the king of Soso took place at Kirina in the early 13th century. In this battle, Sundiata defeated the Soso king, ended his rival's power, and opened the way for the birth of a new empire, the Mali Empire. From a tribal leader, Sundiata became the founder of a vast empire. He did not triumph by force alone, but also through his ability to unite. After his victory, Sundiata did not destroy everything and rebuild from scratch. Instead, he tried to knit together the various tribes and territories so that they would all recognize a central authority. He came to be seen as a Mansa, a king, but at the same time the head of a broad coalition, in which local chiefs retained a degree of autonomy in exchange for loyalty to the empire and the obligation to provide manpower and resources when needed. Under Sundiata, Mali gradually took control of key areas, the gold fields to the south, the trans-Saharan trade routes to the north, and strategic points along the Niger River. Thanks to this favorable geography, combined with Sundiata's organizational skill and that of his successors, Mali grew from a rising kingdom into a new center of power in West Africa. The story of Sundiata Keita, therefore, is not just the story of one individual, but the story of a transition from an old order, the Ghana Empire, to a new one, the Mali Empire. If Ghana was the region's first golden empire, then Mali was the heir that elevated that legacy to a higher level, with a stronger administrative system and a wider sphere of influence. Even so, under Sundiata, Mali was still in its foundational phase. The empire had been born, but its name was known mainly within West Africa. For Mali to truly step onto a larger stage, to be recognized in the wider Islamic world, and later to appear in European maps and books, it needed another figure. That figure was Mansa Musa, the king who would transform Mali from a regional empire into a global symbol of wealth in human history. Mansa Musa and the Golden Empire. The most famous figure of the Mali Empire is Mansa Musa, who ruled in the early 14th century during what is considered the golden age of the empire. The title Mansa in the local language means king or emperor. So when we say Mansa Musa, we can understand it as King Musa or Emperor Musa. When Mansa Musa came to the throne, Mali was not an empty land. It was already a kingdom with a fairly solid foundation. But under his rule, Mali rose to a new level, becoming one of the wealthiest and most influential empires in West Africa. Under Mansa Musa, the Mali Empire controlled an enormous share of the world's gold at the time. The gold fields in the south lay within Mali's sphere of influence or directly under its rule, and gold from those regions was transported along the trans-Saharan trade routes that the empire controlled. It wasn't just gold. Mali also held key commercial cities such as Timbuktu, Deo, and many centers along the Niger River. These were places where merchants from many regions gathered, bringing with them goods, news, religion, and knowledge. The caravans, long camel caravans carrying gold, salt, cloth, ivory, and luxury goods, passed through Mali's territory, paid taxes and fees, and helped fill the royal treasury. It was precisely this combination of gold mines, trade routes, and key urban centers that created the extraordinary economic power of the Mali Empire under Mansa Musa. Today, some researchers try to estimate Mansa Musa's wealth in modern terms. Some suggest that his fortune might have been worth hundreds of billions of dollars or even more. Although these figures are only rough estimates and cannot be verified with precision, they are enough to give us the scale, in the eyes of his contemporaries. Mansa Musa embodied a king so wealthy that he almost surpassed ordinary comparison. A historic pilgrimage. When there was so much gold, it broke the economy. What truly made the name Mansa Musa echo far beyond the borders of West Africa was his pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca in 1324. Religiously, it was a Hajj, the sacred duty of a Muslim. But in reality, it was also a massive parade of power and wealth. Mansa Musa did not travel alone. He brought with him a huge entourage: soldiers, officials, slaves, merchants, scholars, and countless servants. Many accounts claim that tens of thousands of people accompanied the king, with hundreds of camels and horses carrying gold, fine cloth, luxury goods, and offerings. Throughout the long journey across the desert, passing through cities and oases, Mansa Musa became famous for his generosity. He gave gold to the poor, donated gold to mosques, and showered local scholars and officials with gifts. For him, this was both an act of charity and a way to show that, far off in the distant west of the Islamic world, there was an empire that was not only devout, but also incredibly wealthy. When Mansa Musa's caravan reached Cairo, then a major capital of Egypt, that generosity reached a whole new level. During his stay there, he spent and distributed so much gold that the price of gold in the region plummeted. The sudden flood of gold into the market shifted the balance of supply and demand, dragging down the value of the precious metal for many years. Imagine a king so rich that just going on pilgrimage, spending freely in his own way, was enough to force an entire regional economy to readjust. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage had two major consequences. First, it made the Islamic world realize that in distant West Africa, there were not only scattered tribes, but also a Muslim empire strong in military power, rich in economic resources, and ready to play a bigger role in the shared religious and commercial networks. Second, this journey put Mali onto Europe's mental map. News of the wealthy black king spread via merchants and scholars and was recorded in books and maps. In many medieval maps, artists drew a black king sitting on a throne in the middle of West Africa holding a large bar of gold. That image was not just a symbol. It was how Europeans imagined Mansa Musa and the Golden Empire of Mali. Knowledge and culture. When Timbuktu was the Library of Africa. When people talk about the Mali Empire, they usually mention gold and wealth first. But if we see Mali only as a giant gold vault, we're still missing a very important part: its knowledge and culture. In medieval West Africa, there was a place with a name that sounds like it came out of a fairy tale: Timbuktu. For many people today, Timbuktu is just a strange, faraway name, sometimes even used to mean a place in the middle of nowhere. But for many centuries, Timbuktu was one of the most important centers of learning in the Islamic world in Africa. It was home to major mosques, schools, and religious teaching centers, where scholars studied the Quran, Islamic law, as well as many other fields such as history, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Timbuktu was not only a place of teaching, it was also famous for its vast collections of manuscripts and handwritten books. Books in Arabic and local languages were carefully copied and passed down through generations. At certain times, books in Timbuktu were considered almost as precious as gold. Merchants coming to Timbuktu didn't just trade in gold, salt, ivory, or material goods. They also hunted for rare manuscripts, books that were hard to find anywhere else. In a sense, people came here to trade in knowledge itself. This combination of gold, trade, and learning made the Mali Empire not only an economic powerhouse, but also a cultural and intellectual center for all of West Africa. In its own time, Mali was not just rich, it was also a place that produced and preserved ideas, books, and influential thinkers whose impact reached far beyond the borders of the empire itself. Why did such a wealthy empire decline? At this point, a natural question arises: Why couldn't an empire so rich it could spend gold and shake the market manage to last? The first reason was succession and internal division. After the time of Mansa Musa, the throne of Mali repeatedly fell into the hands of successors who lacked the prestige and capability to rule. Disputes broke out at court, factions fought for power, and the authority of the central government gradually weakened. The second reason was that the empire was simply too large to control. Mali stretched across a vast territory, home to many different peoples, languages, and customs. When the central government was no longer strong enough, the distant regions began to govern themselves. Some areas rebelled, others drifted away from real imperial control. The third reason was competition from other empires. New regional powers, especially the Songhai Empire, gradually rose to seize key cities, major trade routes, and the territories that had once generated huge revenues for Mali. Step by step, Mali lost the golden links in its chain of power. The fourth reason was the shift in global trade. As Europeans began opening sea routes to trade directly with coastal regions of Africa, the caravan routes across the desert, the economic backbone of Mali, started to lose their importance. As the flow of goods and gold changed direction, an empire that lived by controlling the old routes was inevitably hit hard. All these factors combined, internal division, a sprawling territory that was hard to govern, rising rivals, and an outside world that had leapfrogged Mali with new trade routes, caused the empire to weaken step by step, lose its cities, lose its revenues, and eventually lose the status of a golden empire it once held. The legacy of the Mali Empire, more than just gold. Today, when people hear the name Mali, many only know it as a poor, unstable country in West Africa. Few realize that on this very land there once existed one of the wealthiest and most influential empires of the medieval world. Looking back at history, Mali was once home to one of the world's major centers of gold production and trade, a place where trans-Saharan trade routes converged, and a bridge between North Africa, the Middle East, and sub-Saharan Africa. Not only that, cities such as Timbuktu and Gao were home to mosques, schools, scholars, and libraries, turning Mali into a true intellectual center of West Africa. There, people did not only trade goods, but also exchanged books, ideas, and religious knowledge. The figure of Mansa Musa, the Black King often regarded as the richest man in history, is also part of that legacy. He symbolizes a time when Mali was both an economic powerhouse and deeply connected to the wider Islamic world. The story of the Mali Empire reminds us that world history does not revolve only around Rome, Britain, France, or China. In Africa, in regions often dismissed as far away on the map, there were once magnificent, complex empires, rich in gold, rich in learning, and rich in lessons that still matter today. If you found the story of the Mali Empire interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos about lesser-known empires in world history. Which empire would you like to hear about next? The Songhai Empire, the Khmer Empire, or another forgotten superpower somewhere in Africa or Asia? Let me know in the comments below which topic you're most curious about.